Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Waalaikumsalam. Waalaikumsalam.
Assalamu alaikum. We're going to be starting off with the surah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Qul huwallahu ahad. Allahu samad. Lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. On behalf of ASA, we want to thank you all for joining us for our mental health panel discussion. We are so excited to host this event, and we are so thankful that all of you could be here today. My name is Sheena. I'm a 9th grader at Jerome High School.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Miriam. I'm an 8th grader at Shanahan. We are part of a youth group from our center called Elo Bid Society. Though we are located in Columbus, Ohio, in the United States, we've been able to outreach to many other places in the world where mental health is still a prominent issue. We as a community are devoted to strengthening Muslim American identity among our youth through service and activism.
We decided to hold this event because mental health is an extreme issue for Muslims, especially after this pandemic. As teenagers ourselves, we found that this was a necessity to have as a resource for our community. For me, I think it's super important for youth or anybody to get help or some sort of direction because they deserve to feel valid with their emotions, especially with our culture since it is really stigmatized. Those were the main things that made us think that this was an amazing event idea.
Our goal of this event is to provide proper help and guidance to anyone struggling or in need of assistance. I want to highlight the fact that we planned this event a whole year ago. This topic was important before the pandemic and is incredibly important now.
Our first panelist is Professor Sakina Rizvi, joining us from the University of Toronto, Canada, and she will be addressing depression and suicide in the context of Muslim society in the West.
Next will be Sanal Basha, licensed social worker in our very own ABS community, who will talk about self-care. Next, Dr. Sandos Al-Sad, a family clinician in Columbus, will discuss community wellness and Noor Masjid journey with mental health advocacy. Lastly, Sana will present local resources available.
All these panelists will be followed by a question and answer. Remember that if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to ask any questions in the live chat. And if you're listening here on Zoom, you can directly message us in the chat or to interact with each speaker.
Now I would like to introduce our speakers. Professor Sakina Rizvi, she received her PhD in the Faculty of Pharmacy and Collaborative Program in Neuroscience at the University of Toronto. She has over 10 years of research experience in psychiatry with a focus in major depressive disorder. Currently, Dr. Rizvi is a scientist in the Arthur Summer Rottenberg ASR for short, Suicide and Depression Studies program at St. Michael's Hospital and assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry, University of Toronto. She is also a registered psychotherapist qualifying with the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario. Her research characterizes the new neurobiology of suicide risk and treatment-resistant depression. In addition to her research, Professor Rizvi is actively involved in outreach and advocacy projects with an emphasis on providing mental health education to the community through the creative arts. Salam, thank you for joining us today.
Walaikum salam. I'm very honored to be here today. Let me just share my my screen here.
Actually, before you started, we had some quick questions to start off.
Yeah.
So, for me personally, during the pandemic, I felt very isolated from everyone and very introverted. And I know many teens can't join their usual sports or do like jobs that they usually have because of the pandemic. And many kids can't even go to school. And if they do, it's really hard to interact with people. So, has this, and also, I feel like my daily routine takes a lot more effort than it usually does, just waking up and finishing my homework. So, how does this pandemic affect your clients and yourself?
I think what you're talking about is it's happening to everybody across the board. With my clients, it's my colleagues, myself. Everything feels harder right now. You know, in the pandemic, we're in a situation where there's like this global trauma, right? There's just threat in our environment. We're not allowed to go outside. There's more fear. And even if we're not expressly feeling it, it takes a lot of energy to constantly be scanning your environment for threat. We don't have access to our usual coping strategies, like being with friends, being outside, with the same freedom that we did before. So it really makes a lot of sense how much this is really impacting us. And definitely we're seeing across the board demotivation, and just like what you're saying, like the typical things you might do in a day are a lot more challenging. So with clients who I have, they're like, well, I just don't want to feel like I'm being lazy. I'm like, well, you're not, because all of these things that you're doing requires so much energy, right? It just requires, you kind of have to reweight everything that you were doing before, where, you know, getting up, brushing your teeth, flossing, having breakfast, all these things just feel a lot harder right now. And I think we can find some compassion in that, and allow ourselves to, you know, recalibrate what we're expecting ourselves to be doing in an environment like this.
What trends have you seen during the pandemic as an increase in depression?
So I'm from Canada. So some of the research that has been coming out early on has found a really significant increase in, significant decrease in mental health. So like around a 62% decrease in mental health across the board in Canadians that have been surveyed across the different waves of the pandemic in the lockdowns. We're also seeing increases in people who experience suicidal thoughts here, like about triple. And I don't anticipate that that's going to be that different in the States as well. So definitely the restrictions, the quarantines, the lack of access to coping strategies and especially for people who are living alone, and the challenges of being that isolated are really, really challenging to deal with right now.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like me to share my slides now, or is that?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Okay, great. So yeah, I'm very, very honored to be here with all of you to discuss this really important issue around depression and suicide in youth. I'm so pleased that the youth have taken the initiative to have an event like this. It really shows a lot of strength and resilience and a desire to really move forward, which I think is amazing. So my hope is by the end of this session and this talk, hopefully really directing some of this to the youth about what suicide is, what are some of the challenges that youth experience, and also really speaking to the parents as well about that, and the community at large, about how we can start to work with that and come together to help each other and support each other through that. But before we do that, I'd like to start off with just a few questions I'd like to invite you to consider. And whether you jot it down or just take a mental note in your head, what I would like you to consider, I'm just going to close that polling because we're going to save that for a second in a little bit. What I would like you to consider is what your immediate response is to these questions. So why do you think people are depressed or die by suicide? What thoughts come to mind when you hear someone is depressed or has died by suicide? And how would you support someone who told you they were feeling depressed or had suicidal thoughts? And if you take a few moments and consider these questions, it gives you a starting point to get a sense of where are you in terms of understanding what mental health is and what biases, what negative biases or stigma might you have that's associated with mental illness. And this is so important and vital to address as we move forward as a community. And so I really would like to start off with that. And this is something we'll kind of come back to throughout the talk as well. So just to give you a little bit of background, depression in youth is a very significant issue. It's affecting at least 20% of youth before adulthood. 14% will have depression the last year. Its connection with suicide is very clear. It is very common for people with depression to have suicidal thoughts, and that can range from anything related to, I just don't feel like life's worth living, versus I have a plan to harm myself very soon. And the other piece of that link is that depression is present in about half of all suicides. And with respect to how that presents in youth, suicide is the second leading cause of death in US youth in America. And if we look at young males, we see that rate, 17.9 for 100,000, is a lot higher than in young women. So that's expected. It may be surprising for people to know that males are at more risk for death by suicide, whereas women are more at risk for suicide attempts. And just to highlight that for every suicide death, there's estimated approximately 25 to 30 attempts. So in America, that results in over 1.4 suicide attempts over the course of a year. And that's likely an underestimation. So there may be some thoughts that perhaps suicide is something that isn't really present in the Muslim community. And that really couldn't be further from the truth. It's really important to know that suicide rates in America have been on a steady incline over the course of the last 10 years. And this is something that is affecting the Muslim community as well. While it's really hard to get exact data on this in the States, from the data that is available from local mosques and other centers, suggests that there is an increase in that as well over time. So this is something we cannot afford to not look at. We need to be able to start to have these conversations and really addressing that stigma and the negative biases that we have is a really important part of that process. So I'd like to address some of the challenges that Muslim youth in America are experiencing compared to their non-Muslim, non-ethnic peers. And integrating into a new culture is very stressful for people who've either immigrated here and are now growing up here, or people who you've born here maybe in the last 2-3 generations. Learning how to maintain your heritage while being able to engage in this new culture that you find yourself in can be very challenging, especially if those cultures can be quite different in terms of their value systems. So learning how to explore your sense of self and develop your self-identity in youth at such a really tender age, this is a really important developmental stage, can cause a lot of stress, right? And it can be related to feelings of depression and isolation, not feeling like you connect or belong. So Muslims in general tend to be less help-seeking. This may be related to more community stigma, related to more shame around mental health. There's also things like academic and career pressures. For the youth that I see now, like when I look at all of the things that you're doing, I'm so overwhelmed and astounded by how much you're able to accomplish. And there can be so much pressure to do more and more and more and more, when sometimes those expectations aren't realistic. We were really designed as limited human beings. Our brain has a limited capacity for attention, for memory, for processing information. And if we try to go beyond that, our brain and our body really starts to fight back. So there can be that pressure, but then there's also the expectations that we feel we need to live up to, that are really, really putting a lot of stress on our youth today. Another reality is youth experiencing more racism, Islamophobia. There's also generational gaps, which will always exist, but also become more complicated when people are coming from different cultures. If you have youth that have been born and raised in America versus coming from another country, their parents have been raised somewhere else, it can be a breeding ground for miscommunication and conflict if people aren't being empathetic to each other. So what exactly is depression? And we really define this by a combination of symptoms that are occurring for at least 2 weeks. Just to clarify that the symptoms I'm presenting are not, all in the diagnostic manual. I'm presenting more than what you would find there, because there's certain things that are presented in teens and also maybe in the Muslim community, especially the Asian community, that may present that are worthy of note. So the two symptoms that you really want to be watching for are things like sadness, hopelessness, feeling helpless, or maybe your mood isn't necessarily really low, but you're finding that you don't really feel interested in the things around you, or that you don't derive the same pleasure in things that you used to. Other things you might notice in yourself and your friends, and for parents, you're noticing in your kids, maybe they're withdrawing from their friends or from the family. Maybe they're having problems in school. It's difficult to concentrate, maybe more irritability, restlessness. There's been changes in eating and sleeping patterns, and sleeping is so vital, especially for adolescents. And maybe you're finding that you have lower self-esteem, you're not feeling so good about yourself, and you don't really have energy or motivation, and some thoughts of suicide are coming to your mind. Other symptoms that might be there are that could be more unexplained physical symptoms. And so, as I mentioned before, in Asian cultures, they tend to present more with some of these physical symptoms as opposed to some of the emotional symptoms. So it's just something to be aware of. If you have some unexplained physical symptoms, and they're persisting and there's no reason for it, this might be a clue to how you might be feeling. The way we feel and our physical body are very interconnected. So things like headaches, you're feeling pain or heaviness in your chest, or heart's racing, stomach pains, maybe you feel too cold all the time or too hot all the time. These could be indications that there's some emotions there that maybe are not being recognized, and it could be also symptomatic of depression. So in terms of what suicide is, this is quite complex and not as simple as someone wanting to die. And I want to be very clear that suicide is not a feeling. We don't feel suicidal. Suicide is a behavior. And it is a behavior that is in response to a very, very deep emotional pain. So when I ask my clients, like, what would happen if, we were able to find a way to get you out of this pain? Would you want to die? They're like, of course not. I want to live. So it's not about wanting to die. It's about not knowing how to live with the pain that they're experiencing and not being able to see a way out of it. And so that's something that I want to make really clear, even though this is still, simplistic, but with the understanding that suicide is really a reflection of a really deep emotional suffering. And if we can start to understand what is the suffering, let's start talking about the emotional pain you're experiencing. Where is it coming from? What does it mean to you? How can we work with it? That's where you can find a lot of the healing in suicidal crisis. So I'd like to poll the audience here and get a sense of, what do you think causes suicide and depression? So A, is it a lack of willpower? B, genetics and changes in the brain? C, not feeling grateful enough? D, life or environmental stressors? Or E, maybe is B and D. So you're going to see something pop up on the screen. And I'm gonna give you a moment to answer. So I'll take about 10 seconds and see what people think. Okay. So it looks like most people, pretty much everybody, all the people that voted said B and D, which is true. So genetics and changes in the brain and life and environmental stressors. And I'd like to take a moment to talk more specifically about that. So with respect to changes in the brain, so I know this figure might look kind of intimidating, so don't worry, there's no test, you don't need to know any of these details, but I just want to draw your attention to the areas in green. And these are areas that are impacted consistently during experiences of depression as well as suicide risk. And these areas of the brain are very important in being able to help us manage our emotions, help us to inhibit our behaviors, decision-making, learning, and so many other things that are related to depression and suicide risk. So when you are in distress, it's also really important to know, this applies to everybody, that this front of the brain that's really important for understanding things and making sense of thoughts and what's happening around you is no longer functioning as well, right? You're more kind of revert into more of a threat state where you're kind of scanning the environment for threat in order to more immediately react to it. So this isn't working as well. So decision making is going to be a lot more challenging when you're in a state of distress and working with your thoughts at all. So another thing that's really important to know is, especially for youth, is that your brain does not stop developing until you're well into your 20s, this area of the front of the brain. So you're really not done cooking yet. So you may find there's certain things right now in your life that feel more challenging to do in terms of managing certain emotions that might not be as hard later on in your life. So another thing to take note of with respect to this is that we see these brain changes really consistently in the research. And this is no different than if someone had Parkinson's or Alzheimer's disease. It also impacts the brain. And also noting that things like diabetes and heart disease can also impact the brain that make it more likely that someone will experience symptoms of depression. But we tend to not judge those individuals for those medical illnesses like we judge people that have mental illness. So it's not just brain areas, it's actually also the chemicals in your brain that might be impacted. And so for more senior youth or adults, you might know these brain chemicals, it's neurotransmitters, it's how the brain talks to each other, the different parts of the brain talk to each other. And there's chemicals in your brain that are important for our mood, how we regulate our mood, for how we experience pleasure, attention, and all of these chemicals are impacted during depression. All of them are impaired. As more research comes out with regards to suicide risk, we're seeing more and more that they're impacted there too. So with all of these brain changes, it makes a lot of sense that there are challenges with memory, being able to pay attention and concentrate, and make even small decisions can feel really challenging. Or even learning that there are things that are pleasurable and rewarding in your environment. It's harder to even learn that and to recognize that. But I know that there's all these kind of challenges that tend to happen and things that are happening in the brain and how we think. But I want to leave off this piece with noting that the great thing is that humans are also designed to be very resilient. And with the right support and help, these brain changes and your ability to think more clearly can actually go back to a healthier state. But you really do need the supports and the help in place for that. So we talked about some of the brain changes. If we look at some of the life stressors that are impacting youth with respect to depression and suicide, the pandemic that we're experiencing is, of course, one of them. There's other stressors like bullying. There's definitely, high rates of bullying in Muslim communities, sense of hopelessness, belonging, and as we kind of also talk about being able to integrate with the culture, if you don't feel a sense of belonging, you feel more disconnected, that can really put you more at risk. Problems with conflict with parents, school, feeling isolated. And that isolation can also be a really, big risk factor as well. There was a study in over 17,000 adolescents, and that those that preferred social isolation had highest risk for suicidal ideation and self-harm. And I want to make it very clear that preference for social isolation is beyond, introvert versus extrovert. We all socialize in different ways, and introverts do socialize, but they socialize in a way that feels good to them. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't all have to look the same for everybody, but as long as you can check in with yourself and you feel that those needs are being met, then you're okay. So what can you do to help yourself and others? So if there's one thing I feel like you can take away from this session is understand your biases and stigma. Stigma being a negative view of a person because of a characteristic they have. Perhaps it's, it could be race, it could be religion, it could be mental illness. So in this context, it's really important that we start to understand the negative stigma because it's really impacting people's abilities to get help. And there could be fears, there could be perceptions that mental illness is a personality weakness, or maybe it means someone's not grateful enough, it's shameful. There could be fears about what the community will say. There's also a culture of not discussing challenges outside of the family, which can be problematic because not addressing the problem doesn't help it go away. And this is kind of basic environmental psychology, that if we have a small problem now, if we don't address it, it becomes a really big problem later. And so this is what we're seeing. We're seeing an increase in how youth are struggling. So if no one gets help, then what ends up happening is, lives, relationships, families break down. And I really want to appreciate the fear that can arise in talking about these issues. And mental illness and suicide can be scary, right? And fair enough. But it's really important to know that there are resources, there's help out there to support individuals, couples, families as well. I want to highlight this quote from the South Asian Youth Mental Health Association. This is a youth from the organization who made this comment. And I think this applies in the Muslim community as well, that I feel that in the South Asian community, it's tough to talk to anyone about a mental health issue. People often struggle to understand what the term mental health means and feel a lot of shame if people are affected by mental health challenges, which makes it harder for people to ask for help. That's why it's very important to teach people about stigma and that it's okay to need support. So if you're noticing that you definitely do have biases, and we all do to some extent, one of the key ways of battling that is really educating yourself. Okay, so other parts around stigma can also be related to fear, but a big part is like we need to get educated and understand, like, what is this? What is mental? What am I even dealing with here? There are a lot of resources for this. And I know that Sana and Sondos are going to be discussing this more in their talks. So I just wanted to kind of highlight some of these things. Also, there's distress lines that you can contact if you're not feeling, if you're in distress or if you feel like you need to talk to someone. Nasiha is actually a Muslim distress line that is accessible. It's actually based in Canada, but it's accessible by phone or text to anybody in North America. If you're a youth and you don't really want to talk to an adult, there's actually youth lines as well that do peer-to-peer support. And within those, there's a therapist in the room who's monitoring everything so that to make sure that you're getting the correct kind of information. So this is a big one. Being able to identify your feelings is a really important part of healing from depression and suicidal crises. There can be an avoidance of anything that feels uncomfortable, and maybe, a think positive attitude. I think especially with social media, you see a lot of this kind of toxic positivity. And thinking positive can help in a moment as a strategy, but it's really not enough to get through a mental illness. And it also doesn't lead to lasting change because you're not addressing the problem. So, as a neuroscientist, I really see emotions as really important pieces of information. It's like if you're trying to come up with, a problem-solving solution like a puzzle, emotions are part of it, what you're thinking is part of it, all these other things, factors are part of it. And if you are missing part of that puzzle, it's going to be really hard to know what to do with it. So if we're able to start to identify what we feel, then we will be able to bring it to the surface and learn to, one, manage it, and also understand where it's coming from to be able to resolve some of that, that distress. And there's a need to identify the feeling, but there's also a need to identify it with self-compassion. And when I talk about self-compassion, I don't necessarily mean just like, write 5 things that are wonderful about yourself. It's really about how do you show up for yourself when things get hard, right? There's this great analogy about, when we have an uncomfortable, painful feeling, we get pierced with the first arrow. That's already painful. And then when we start to judge ourselves for having that feeling, you shouldn't feel that way, that's weak, we get pierced with the second arrow of self-judgment. Now we're dealing with 2 arrows instead of 1. So self-compassion really just takes away the second arrow that we don't need for the healing process. It actually isn't helpful for that. And if it's hard to understand what that means to show up for yourself, think about your best friend, someone that you love, coming to you with the exact same problem, saying the exact same things to you. And you'll probably be very surprised at how compassionate of a response you give to that person. And is there an opportunity then to turn that around and give that kind of compassion to yourself? And that's how we can learn to really be our own best friends. So it's really important as a community, if issues around mental health are going to be addressed and moved forward from, that we have a safe space to discuss these things, and that there's open and non-judgmental communication. A big piece of that is being able to validate what someone is feeling. I'll tell you what validation isn't. It's not about agreeing or approving of what someone is experiencing. It's understanding. So it could be that, you have a lot on your plate, you're dealing with, maybe you've got some friends who are trying to bully you, or, and you've got all these courses you have to do and you're really stressed. It makes sense that you're feeling really scared. You might have a different perspective of how they should handle it, but it's the validation that that person feels heard and they feel comforted. And what a gift, especially for parents, like to give their kids a space where they feel comforted and safe, because that's all our youth really want from our families, to be loved, understood, and cared for. So meeting in that place of empathy is such a great way to start a conversation. And really what it does, it's actually working on a biological level too. It really reduces all of this negative stress if you're able to validate someone. This is a skill set that you can apply to everybody. My husband and I practice this all the time. I get that it's a lot easier said than done, but it's something that's really, really important to do. And also just understanding that the person in front of you is in pain, right? This person that you love and you care about is in pain. They don't want that, right? They want to feel better. So can we empathize with them and be curious about what they're going through? Okay, you're feeling sad and you're feeling anxious. What's that like for you? What's happening in your life that you feel like might be triggering that or making that worse? Or the things in your life that you feel maybe make that a little bit better too? What is that like for you? And being more curious about it can really help to create an avenue, that a space that's more safe to have those conversations. And also, it's really important to get support from a mental health professional. This is, again, something that Sen and Sondas will be talking about further. Family members are an amazing resource to help when in need, but they cannot provide the same help as a mental health professional who is using evidence-based treatments to help you shift out of the state that you're in. And please understand that it's a lot easier to get better the sooner you get help. So we see that the longer people delay getting treatment, the harder it is for them to get past it. So there is an important, lesson in there that, even though it might be scary to get help, it's important to try to get help as soon as you can, because there's all these, as I mentioned, there's all these processes that are happening, regardless of whether, we want to look at it or not, they're happening in our body, in our brain, and we need to be able to address that. So I'd like to end off this section with really kind of some basic do's and don'ts of when someone is having suicidal thoughts. And the thing I would really like to take away from this the most is ask. I guarantee you that asking about suicide does not increase suicide risk. I do this all of the time in my research with my clients. And I get that this is can be a very scary question to ask. But if we don't ask, we don't know. We don't know what's happening. We cannot help somebody. And especially, you know, for youth, if you're going through something like this is something that you should not have to deal with by yourself. Okay, like this is something that needs support. So really wanting to normalize asking that question, being able to assess warning signs that people aren't really talking about their future anymore. They're feeling more pessimistic. Do they have access to a method that they're planning on using to harm themselves? And is there some way that you can work with them to try to remove that method? Listening non-judgmentally, offering hope, but not in a way that it's, you know, oh, you have so much to live for. You have so much to live for can come across as quite invalidating, because it's like saying what you feel and what you're thinking is silly. You shouldn't feel that way, right? When given this person is in intense emotional distress and their entire universe is colored with this pain, it's understandable that maybe they don't feel like life is worth living. Can we come at it from that perspective and also help ground them in what they find hopeful in terms of what they are living for, rather than what we think that they should be living for. So for them, maybe it's a particular goal, maybe it's a certain person in their life that they really love, that really helps ground them and give them hope. Problem fixing is something that I find that with clients, they're often complaining about. If I talk to someone about it, they just try to fix the problem. And you can't fix this problem, right? The most you can really do is be there for somebody and help them, you know, connect to the resources that they need and be a good support. But you cannot fix this problem yourself, because it's beyond that. The other thing I think is really important, and especially for youth, if you're dealing with friends, please do not promise confidentiality. This is incredibly important. If somebody is telling you that they want to take their life, that is not something that you can keep confidential. Somebody needs to know about that. That's also way too much for you to deal with. And so you don't want to have a situation where you're like, I promise I won't say anything to somebody, and then you're going to have to break that. If you know from the outset, saying, like, you know, your friend is struggling, and say, hey, if you're thinking that, you know, you're going to want to take your life, or you're going to want to do something, I love you and I want to keep you safe, so I can't keep that to myself, but please share that with me so we can get you the help that you need. And talk to parents and talk to other, you know, people, maybe even if you're at school, just let an adult know what's going on. Same thing for parents. You know, not promising confidentiality to your kids would be the same thing. As therapists, we don't promise confidentiality about suicide risk to our clients, because we're legally required to do something if they're going to imminently harm themselves. So we make that very clear. That doesn't prevent them from confiding in us, but we need them to know that. So we've talked a lot today about what depression and suicide is, what are some of the things that we can do to support someone, and I'd like to just kind of address those first few questions again, and consider them again in terms of, why do you think people are depressed or die by suicide? What thoughts come to mind when you hear someone is depressed or has died by suicide? And how would you support someone who told you they were feeling depressed or had suicidal thoughts? And I'd like to invite you to consider if there's any little shifts or anything you would like to learn more about that is different from when you first started, you know, half an hour ago, or if there's any even different ways of how you would like to interact with someone to show your support and love, and how you might go about doing that. So again, really addressing these questions is so vital in being able to move forward as a community, making sure our youth are really supported in the way that they deserve. So I'm more than happy to answer questions, even outside of this session. If you feel you need to get in touch, I would love to hear from you. This is my email address, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I think one person does have a question.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. I have a friend who she unfortunately has started doing a little bit of like self-harm. I think school has gotten very stressful for her, and her parents are not the strongest believers in mental health. I mean, like her parents even have their own like mental health problems, but they don't believe like that their children have mental health problems. And so she has come and she like talked to me about it, and like my mom's a doctor, so like I have like some knowledge about it, but like not at like enough to like deal with this. So my mom says to like approach your parents, but I feel like if I do approach your parents, they're just going to attack her, and there's not going to be that like trust between me and her. So I don't really know how to approach that kind of situation.
That's really, really challenging. It's MENA, right? So that's a really, really difficult situation to be in. One thing I want to clarify, self-harm, where someone might be, doing something to their body, like to harm themselves, is different than suicide risk. I know that sounds kind of confusing, but typically people who are self-harming are not necessarily doing it with an intent to die. They're doing it as an attempt to regulate their emotions. So it's not that they're like at immediate suicide risk. The problem is that, depending on how they're harming themselves, they can actually even accidentally do something fatal. So that is something that is important to know. It's really difficult, I think, if parents don't understand. However, I don't know if there's an opportunity, I don't know if there's someone else in the community, maybe an alim that you can connect with that can also help to mediate that with the parents. But I think it also needs to be a conversation with her about how she's going to help herself through this, right? And staying quiet about it isn't going to help her get through it. She does need to get help for that. And helping find ways to empower her to make those choices, and making sure she's part of that decision-making process. But then also kind of mentioning, like, if I do feel like, you're not safe, like I have to do something about that because I love you. But if there's other supports, I don't know if there's people even in the school system, whether it's a school counselor or someone that she can connect with, that might be able to help with understanding what her distress is as well. And I'd also invite some of the other speakers to even comment on that, Sana and Sondos, if you have any other thoughts on that.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thanks, Mina, for your question. I usually recommend, honestly, personalized cases to be asked in more confidential, or rather in confidence, I think, since we are still like a smaller community as Muslims, and most likely you can easily identify who's the person who's having some current struggles. I do agree with Dr. Sakina that cutting or self-harm is actually a way to calm that pain. So it's an emotional regulation, and recommending that your friend seeks help is a great way. Recommending such talks is a great way. Identifying some of the resources that will be shared by the panelists today also can be a great way to refer. And it all depends also on the severity of their clinical case, like how bad their depression or their anxiety or whatever is the motivation or the underlying deep cause that leads to such, unhealthy way to regulate emotions or respond to their challenges in stabilizing their mental state. But always, I think, seek professional help, encourage your friend to seek mental help is what I would recommend. And I think one of the biggest reasons such panels are needed and webinars are to encourage the community to create an internal safe haven for our Muslim youth to seek help. And this is still like a work in progress. And I'm hoping that some of the models that we will discuss today will create a better space for Muslim youth to come in to the local masajid and feel that they are allowed and welcome in their vulnerable state, not just in, you know, perfect mental state or wellness stage as well. And I'm sorry that you had to kind of face that at this young age and to deal with it. And I appreciate your compassion towards your friend. I would still encourage that these cases to be discussed in confidence and to reach out to people outside the public court if potentially possible.
I agree with both of what the other panelists have said. I believe that, you know, self-harm can have underlying severe mental health problems, but you want to make sure that, you know, your friend is safe, and it sounds like you're really concerned. So I would have that conversation with her or him, and I would also encourage you to, you know, educate yourself about the resources so that you can educate them. So that's kind of all I'd like to add.
Okay, thank you. If we have any more questions, we can wait a couple seconds. I know me and Mariam did have a question to Sakina. So, how can we approach our family or if our parent or our children about mental health?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I really do think it is a responsibility of parents to create a safe environment to have these conversations. You're the CEOs of the family, right? So in terms of rules of engagement, how everyone, you know, that really does flow from you. And so I'd say for parents, I'm curious if there's anyone here actually who would like to give their thoughts on that, like directly from parents, to see what their thoughts are on how youth might be able to approach them. I wonder if anyone's willing to share. It's okay if you're not.
Share, just raise your hand so I can unmute you. Because I know you can't unmute yourself.
Everyone just feels like being more quiet today. Yeah.
Can I say something? This is Homa. I like to try and approach my kids first. I think that sometimes it's hard for them to bring up a topic, and I know when I was young, it was hard for me to initiate a conversation that I hadn't had with my parents before. So sometimes I try and preempt that by asking them directly about, you know, what's going on in their life, instead of, and maybe not such an open-ended question, but how are you feeling, or are you sad, or, you know, try and explore their emotions with them. So that could lead to, you know, some deeper conversations about what they're going through, and or not, it could just be, you know, just checking in. So I try and create that forum that way.
That's awesome. So it's like basically showing that I'm here, I care, and you can talk to me if you need to. For people like that, building that trust with your kids is so important, because if kids think that they're going to be lectured or put down, like they're not going to come and tell you that these problems are happening. So I think that if it's a case that, you know, you want to even start to go and even take even a step back, say you're watching, there's so many movies out there on Netflix right now that deal with youth mental health. What if you watch a movie together and then you have a conversation about, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts on depression and suicide based on this character? It's a way to kind of externalize it, so it's not talking about them yet, but they're learning that they can have that conversation with you, right? So are there ways that you can create opportunities to bring in conversations like that, so you can let them know that you're there and that you're open to having those kinds of conversations as well?
Okay, thank you. If you have any more questions, just message it and we can come back to it at the end because I know we are going to have a final question answer. So thank you so much, Dr. Sakina, for your time.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so next we would like to introduce Sana Al-Bosch. Sana studied at The Ohio State University and received her bachelor's and master's of social work with a focus on mental health and addiction. She works as a hospital liaison in mental health crisis at Southeast Healthcare, a Columbus nonprofit seeking to provide holistic healthcare to the community. She has her LSW and is currently studying for her independent social work license. Her slides presentation will be about self-care ideas and to support your well-being.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So I also wanted to thank Professor Sakina. That was a really nice, beautiful speech, I think, about suicide and depression and how important it is to get the help that you need. That was also a really pretty heavy topic. So I would really like to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about one thing that you can do to help lessen some of those overwhelming feelings, and that is self-care. So to start off, I want to start by checking in with ourselves. So if you will, please do this with me. Please take a deep breath. I want you to relax your shoulders and unclench your jaw and release those forehead muscles. And you can roll your head around a little bit or roll your shoulders. And just kind of notice how you're feeling right now. If you followed along just now, congrats, because you just practiced some self-care with me. So you already know how to do it. So let me talk a little bit about what self-care is. So self-care is basically doing activities to help our minds, bodies, and spirits promote well-being and to reduce stress. Even if you're not currently stressed, building self-care into your life can help you manage your feelings that you might have in the future. Self-care helps improve your resilience. Resilience means that you're able to deal with problems while holding your head up, or bouncing back after challenges, or it might also be just trying your best. So when you practice self-care, you help build that resilience to help cope better with life's challenges. It can also make it easier to help calm down after you get upset. I want to touch on anxiety just a little bit briefly before we continue. So anxiety means basically like nervousness, stress, but it can also come out in physical changes in your body. We call those changes somatic symptoms, which is basically physical changes that are caused by mental states. So these can be things like, having butterflies in your stomach or having a stomach ache. It can be feeling tired in the middle of the day. For example, if you feel like you're going to throw up before a test, or if you have to go to the bathroom every time after you finish talking in front of your class, those are probably symptoms of anxiety. I did want to note that feelings are subjective. Your experience doesn't have to be somebody else's experience, but that also means that self-care is going to be different for everybody. To be honest, self-care can be really hard. So Try not to ignore your stress or depressed feelings or other mental health problems and hope that it goes away. Instead, try checking in with yourself, like we did a few minutes ago. Notice how you're feeling. You can also take it a little bit further by asking yourself, what led you to feel this way right now? And what can you do to help yourself? For example, sometimes, you might spill some milk and you might start crying. But was it really the spilled milk, or was it something that happened earlier in the day? You didn't do well on a test, somebody was bullying you, things like that. So really figuring out kind of what was going on in your life to make you feel the way that you are when you're feeling upset is important. So next I want to show a little bit of a video. Alhamdulillah, I am a master of my study. I am not an alam or religious scholar. So I'm going to play this short clip from a lecture. This is from Sheikh Arif Abdul Hussein about the importance of identifying feelings, so that you can also have a little bit of a religious perspective. So let me go pull up the video. Give me 1 second. I'm going to move my screen around. You guys hear that?
No, we can't hear it.
So I'm going to stop sharing and then share again.
Sana, can you allow the sound from your computer?
Usually it asks if I can whenever I'm sharing, right when I push share. Let me try. I think this might.
When God invites us to return to Him in a state of contentment, He's saying to us that that is your purpose, to find me in the rightest way. So what role does God play in the whole of this process? The first thing God does is He reminds us that we are not body or the bodily. Now, being embodied, we become clothed with the bodily properties of anxiety, of fear, of insecurity. God reminds us that I am watching over you. I know what is best for you. I am taking care of you. If you are sick, there is a reason for this sickness. Try and dispel it. If you can't, be content with what is happening to you and try to find your deeper existence through that challenge. On the other hand, God liberates us, as in the Quran. God says that I sent my prophet who broke the shackles that tied you, who lifted the burdens of your shoulders. Now we can see that primitive, barbaric community to whom the prophet came became explorers, sailors, scientists within no time whatsoever. God here intellectually liberated them. So God relieves us of our insecurities, empowers us to grow. And then beyond that, God invites us to Himself to forge a very intimate personal relationship with Him, where He calls Himself our parent, the nurturer, that I am nurturing you, tend to me. He calls Himself a friend, share with me from the intimate part of your being. Open up, don't be closed to yourself, because one of the things that impedes the journey is our lack of availability to ourselves, and that we hide beneath garments of false personality and pretense. God invites us to break through them. And at the third level, God tells us that He is our King and our Master, where He says to us, you can leave it to me and you can trust me in being able to overrule any potential threat that might come to you. Have full confidence. So the role of God is to take us along the journey of life, allowing us to culminate in godliness, to represent God. Now that's the beautiful role God plays. If you look at the role of a mentor should not give anything and everything to the student that he is mentoring. A successful mentor is one who is able to make the student needless of the mentor at the end of the journey, by allowing the student to actualize his own or her own potential. That is the role God plays as a parent, as a friend, as a mentor, as a king. He allows us to complete the journey in a most fundamental manner. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So I think that kind of shows part of the religious side. Whenever, you do have those challenges of the culture kind of getting in, or kind of, I guess, thinking heads with some of the mental health needs that you might have. That's one perspective. That's one kind of religious side of that. Like I said, I am a master of my own study in social work. I'm not an ADAM, but I just wanted to bring a little bit of that into this. All right, so now that we have a little bit of understanding about what self-care is, why it's important, I'd like to do another self-care activity. So follow along if you would like. If at any point during this activity you feel like it's not really a good fit for you, you can go back to breathing normally, relaxing your body. So now, if you're ready, I want you to imagine that you are an astronaut and we are all going to take a trip to the moon. So I want you to sit up in your chair and put your feet on the ground because your space boots are heavy. And I want you to put your arms at your sides. And I want you to lift up, bend your elbows and lift up your hands because you're going to hold on to the armrests of your space chair. Once we take off, I want you to tighten every muscle in your body, even your face muscles. And I'm going to do it to my face so you guys can look at me and, giggle a little bit if you want. So even your space muscles, I want you to squint, kind of put on a big smile. On the countdown, I want you to take a big breath and hold it for 10 seconds. And I'll let you know when the 10 seconds are up. Right, so if you're ready, sit up, hold on, take a deep breath. 3, 2, 1. And relax. Take 3 deep breaths. All right, we made it to the moon, so we're going to start again. We're going to go back home, get ready for takeoff. Tighten your muscles and take a big deep breath. 3, 2, 1. And relax. Take 2 to 3 deep breaths again. Right, and then return to normal breathing. And you can repeat this exercise as many times as you'd like. I want you to check in with yourself, notice how you're feeling, and when you're ready, bring yourself back to the presentation. I really like mindfulness as a practice in general because it's something that's already built into the daily lives of most Muslims. So mindfulness means paying attention to something, slowing down, and noticing what you're doing. And you guys probably, for the most people on this, probably practice mindfulness around 5 times a day at least when you pray. Mindfulness is just focusing in a relaxed way. So prayer in of itself is a mindfulness activity. So I want to talk a little bit about some stigma. Mental health disorders tend to make us feel really bad about ourselves. They tend to have feelings of worthlessness or feeling like a failure associated with them. This goes with a lot of different mental health problems, not just depression, not just anxiety. I think that there is a view that in Muslim culture and in immigrant culture, there's a view that we need to be perfect and have no problems and kind of live this perfect life. But in truth, life doesn't work out that way. Life's challenges can be overwhelming. For example, the pandemic. However, supporting each other can really help. And I'll talk a little bit more about some resources later on, but know that medication can save somebody's life. Up here, I have a little self-care is not selfish. You can't pour from an empty cup. Self-care really helps you help others. I like to think about if you've ever been on an airplane, for example. At the beginning, they're going over safety rules. And they say whenever the mask drops, if an oxygen mask drops, put it on yourself first and then put it on the person beside you. That goes for adults caring for their children, everybody, because you really can't help others until you help yourself. I just put some reminders here. Sometimes you need to put your own well-being first. Make sure that you're kind to yourself, stay connected, and get support. It's really important to kind of make sure that you have different things built for yourself so that you're able to care for yourself whenever you are feeling, depressed, anxious, angry, kind of anything in the moment. It's really helpful to have something built into your day to day where you can kind of bring those coping skills, those self care skills into your life to kind of help manage some of those things. Right. And as a last slide, I just want to finish up. This is kind of a last little activity, which you can do if you want to, whenever you want. So this is one of my favorite activities. It's called Drawing Your Mental Health Monster. You can do this for any mental health problem that you might be facing. So people even give names to their monsters to kind of have an outlet, and also kind of recognize, it helps recognize those mental health problems, those symptoms that you might be having. So as you can see, there are a few here that are hand-drawn. Some are, get out your paints or your colors or your crayons, whatever you want. This is not just an activity for children, it's also an activity for adults. Anybody can do this. And it's just some fun. And on that note, I will let our next speaker present.
Thank you, Senna. Does anyone have any questions? Well, we did have a question. So, many of our coping or self-care strategies that we previously used before the pandemic, just like talking to your friends or like going outside and like talking to people, those we can't really do anymore. So what are like some that we can do, I guess, by ourselves other than just like breathing?
Yeah, so doing different coping skills, like I said, coping skills can be different for everybody. So some people like exercise, which also helps regulate some of those brain chemicals that Professor Sakina was talking about. That could be anything from like, going on a run, going on a walk, stretching, yoga, anything like that. You can also do things like reading, writing, drawing, having some kind of creative outlet, picking up a new skill. Those types of things can also be self-care. And it is difficult because not having that social aspect is, I think, one of the hardest parts about for youth. I know for me, the social aspect of school was huge. That was my favorite part of school. And that could be different for everybody, of course, I know that. But, doing things over Zoom isn't ideal, but you can still have like a tea party over Zoom. You can still go on hikes with people while talking to them on a phone or while FaceTiming. You can still kind of do those things, just in a very different way. But making sure that you care for yourself is super important. We've been in this pandemic for over a year now, and I think a lot of people have learned to adapt. However, it's we're still trying to build up that resilience, and self-care is always important in those situations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again, Sana, for that presentation. Our next panelist is Dr. Sundos Al-Sad. Dr. Al-Sad is currently the head of the Education Department at the New Islamic Cultural Center, program manager for NICC Muslim Mental Health Line, board member of the Initiative on Islam and Medicine, volunteer researcher at the Family and Youth Institute, volunteering provider at Newark Clinic, Columbus Free Clinic, and Helping Hands Clinic, and currently works as a clinical assistant professor in the Family and Community Medicine Department, passionate about medical education, Muslim healthcare, community engagement, and empowerment through tailored education.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a great panel so far, and it's very hard to follow both Professor Sakina and Sana with this wonderful inputs, mashallah. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So I just want to make sure that you guys are first able to see my screen. And Perfect. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, so I always like to give some context. I am here because of the roles that Mariam has kindly and generously provided today here. I'm not here because of my just medical degree or my clinical affiliation with a secular institution, right? I'm here because as a youth in your age, since I was 14 years of age, I was always volunteering in Islamic institutions and faith-based organizations and volunteering for humanitarian activities. And this experience has grown an identity or a scarf on me, being the community expert. I can speak the language of a group, of a population, and that led, guided the compass of my educational path. And this is a message for all the youth. You guys matter. What you do today would pretty much shape your tomorrow. So it's very important for you guys to be able to give back to the community, is to understand how important is your engagement in your faith-based organization, not just to grow your Islamic identity, but also to get to know who you are, identify your strengths and areas of improvements and growth. So thanks to Dr. Fatma Chowdhury, which is one great asset in our mental health line at North Islamic Cultural Center. And thanks to Huma a lot for organizing such a wonderful panel to get to know wonderful Muslim professionals nationally and internationally, mashallah. So I appreciate the opportunity. Jazakumullahu khairan. I'll be focusing more on the bigger picture, how a community can actually contribute to moving us from being stuck at the illness and being afraid of talking about it, whether we call it stigma or confusion or fear or incubation or living in our own bubble, whatever labels and stereotypes that we have about this, how we can move from illness to wellness. It's very important to understand in order for us to move towards the communities, who is the American Muslim community, right? What makes us unique compared to other communities around the globe? Muslims continue to have common belief system, but for some reason, we perceive ourselves as so heterogeneous in a way that these differences amongst us has become an internalized barrier for our collaboration and makes us feel, instead of being sophisticated community that can actually model diversity, equity, and inclusion, to a community that is very complex and is very hard to understand. And that internalized perception has been, unfortunately, transferred through Orientalism to the West. So it made it harder for them to understand us, and they just look at us as disunited, divided, and it's very hard to study Muslim community. Hence, it's very hard to provide the services that are unique to our needs. Being American has its own perks, but up to this moment, we don't seem to have kind of built on these strengths or utilize these perks at all. And it's very important to understand that language, culture, and media has changed a lot for Muslim American community. We speak many languages. We have multiple cultures and ethnic backgrounds, and the media of communication has changed a lot. It's not the extended family anymore. It's not the collectivity anymore. It's not the large, huge, knowing few families in small town. We are global citizens, whether we like that or not, and that is actually the true role. I want you guys to pay attention to the pyramid that I have in the middle. Our worldview is very much impacted by our understanding of the culture that we live in, by using the languages our language to express our experiences and understand concepts and meanings. How does this come between us and understanding the mental health line in a community setting? So for instance, in language A lot of times your psychologist or psychotherapist that is not necessarily query or privy to what Muslims think or believe in might use the words depression, anxiety, fundamentalism, radicalism. All of these words do not necessarily match or their definition between the Muslim community and the secular community, right? So subhanAllah, when we use the word depression, anxiety, or even wellness or mindfulness, we don't necessarily connect with these words. So anxiety and depression has been long defined anciently in the Muslim culture. Those are equivalent to the word al-ham or al-gham. And you use these du'as all the time. And if you look at the definition of those in the science, you will find them matching very much. Mindfulness, as Sana has pointed out, it's actually the presence of intention. You're doing your acts and deeds intentionally. So a niyyah, concept of niyyah, which has been, overlooked because we continue to ruminate old terms without matching them to the contemporary concept. And that's why Muslims continue to live in the incubator and sometimes in silos and echo chambers. We talk to each other, but we're not really connecting to the external world. We're not necessarily making our needs clear and explicit. We feel like we need to remain stoic, not share vulnerability. And I think the impact of the American culture of being perfect all the time has impacted our diverse and mosaic worldview and limited our comfort zones into small bubbles within our community. Our worldview is the basics and the base of how we interpret beliefs, how we actually interpret our relationship with God. And that's what Sheikh Arif said a minute ago. That intimate relationship with God is not going to be impacted significantly by the world around us unless our lens through which we view the world is not clear and it's not open wide. And that worldview carries our understanding of values and is the way, I think it's the root of how we express our characters and share our values with the secular global community. So bear that in mind when we are moving forward to see how are these parameters helped me understand how I can start some sort of a community faith-based approach to mental health and mental illness and mental wellness eventually. When I looked at the Muslim community, I found that family is huge. And if you may have noticed that Professor Sakina mentioned that family can be a great resource. Unfortunately, the family nowadays is just a nuclear construct, meaning we don't always have like extended family as the cultures that we carried with us here to the United States or to the North American sphere. But we really still impose a huge value of the concept of family and youth. We use school because we have huge emphasis on academia, but really our utilization of the school system is mainly in degree acquisition as Muslims. We don't really impact the education. We don't impact the curriculum development. We don't give much feedback because we continue to live and focus and incubate our families because we're so worried that our belief system, our relationship with God could be fragile or vulnerable if we allow ourselves to go out of our silos and incubations. The masjid seems to cater for both. So the masjid sometimes provides the missing piece by providing Islamic schooling and kind of accommodates the family through social interactions and activities, community-based intervention through clubs and youth-directed activities, but that's as far as it goes. And we continue to also, I think, import a lot of our Islamic knowledge from overseas. So culturally tailored to the American Muslim needs in the masajid continue to be a work in progress. With all of that in mind, being someone in the healthcare delivery team, I noticed that the interaction between the Muslim community and the healthcare system is pretty much confined into school physicals or like paperwork or forms filling. But there isn't much of an interaction with the healthcare system as, well, this is what I need as a Muslim. Here are my experiences. And, I'm not fully satisfied with this, or I really need more of this. So I started really questioning, what do Muslim patients need? We started doing more of community-based surveys and needs assessments through the North Islamic Cultural Center. And then I noticed also that counseling piece is a taboo. The word counseling is a taboo. What do you mean? I'm crazy? I don't want to do counseling. I'm fine. And the counseling is not just for mental illness. Sometimes it can be just simply life coaching. I can't handle all the inputs from this different culture. Still, we are a younger population compared to the parent American and westernized communities. The Muslim community is fairly younger. Still, we have a lot of first generation. We still have a lot of limited English proficiency in our population. We still have, alhamdulillah, our elders as well. And we haven't fully integrated into all of the systems that we interact with, like schools or colleges or even policymakers. We're so far from that. So when we talk about counseling or what the mental health line looks like, I found that there isn't much cultivation or literacy in that regard. With all of this, I looked at why are the needs of Muslims not there in the literature? Why, as a clinician, as a community expert, as a community servant, I don't have much resources on what does the Muslim community need or what is it struggling with? And that's when I paid attention to the component of research. The word research continues to be intimidating to so many people in the sects, whether it's in the community basis or even in the healthcare industry, whether you're talking about clinicians, you're talking about social workers, you're talking about psychotherapists, all of these components are so far, all these care team members are so far from the research. And I want to remind myself and all of you brothers and sisters here that the research is actually the contemporary word of ijtihad. For some reason, we dropped the ball on that and we continue to rely on other sources of contributing to the literature and the papers and the research out there. That's really unfair for us. We have much more potential than this. So I think investing in developing toolkits and understanding what al-ijtihad should look like in your community is very important for you to connect all these circles together and to distribute our potentials across that spectrum. More importantly, with our cultural package, we think of politics or policy making as another big taboo. We can't do that and still feel safe that our identities will remain untouched, or we may lose our authenticity. And I will come to talk about that. And it's very important when I share this slide with you to share a lot of gratitude to the Noor Islamic Cultural Center, to our outreach department, especially Noor Clinic, Dr. Malika Haq, the director, who has been here like a legend, doing a lot of work, to youth outreach, Sister Amina Barhoumi, Brother Shafiq Ludan, and most importantly, our executive director, Brother Azhar Masood. If it wasn't for all of these people, I wouldn't really have seen the American Muslim community from that window, where they actually feel their comfort zone. All of these people have contributed to a better perspective, clearer vision of what I need to do in better serving my Muslim patients, my Muslim community. And moreover, I think my colleagues who are not necessarily Muslims, but they are genuinely interested in serving all of their patients with equity. So we owe them, we have some accountability to share what the Muslims need in a language that we both can understand. So bringing that happy medium is very important in innovating a community intervention and a community-based programming. We are hurting. I really want you guys to kind of pick that message from today's panel. Muslims are not really immune. And when we talk about Muslim mental health, we are part of these suicide cases that happen. Every 12 minutes, a person sides by suicide. And even if that person is not a Muslim, we should really care about not losing life. And the healthier we are, the more likely we can give, the more likely we can actually contribute to the healing of the globe. Since we are khulafa, global citizens, we really owe this globe a healthier interaction, a wealthier content, and more compassionate approach. 1 in 4 Muslims actually, 1 in 4 Muslim college students have reported some sort of a mental health issue or like healthy risky behavior. Up to 1 in 10 Muslims actually suffer from clinical depression. And I actually think that this is probably underrepresentation and underreporting. Those are the ones that participate in research. And at least 1% of our Muslim community struggle from a psychotic illness, meaning that they're dissociated from the current reality, whether it's because of its overwhelming genetic predisposition or environmental reasons. Our struggles are common across the globe, but certainly there is intersectionality between the heterogeneous identities that we carry, whether it's because of race, skin color, gender, sexual orientation, all of these things. Muslims do struggle on a daily basis, especially that the narrative towards Muslims have been very aggressive and abrasive in the past few years. Muslim students and youth continue to struggle with bullying in schools, right? Classrooms, even in our masajid, there is an internalized bullying that we tend to kind of brush under the rug and not necessarily speak about it, most likely because we don't know how to do that, right? We don't have like research or literature that can help us approach this in a healthy manner without necessarily tipping the balance between, calling out Muslim communities and Muslim organizations. I don't feel comfortable going to public court when Muslim organizations have issues. I think that we should really create community-based interventions where we are able to resolve and heal and then contribute to the global community as well. I love this movie, The Croods, and I do think that we all tend as parents and as community to do the same thing that Rug does. We are always fearful of what we do not know. That is why, subhanAllah, when Allah sent Adam to the globe, the angels challenged that messenger, like, why would you create someone who may have a lot of wrongdoing? And then the first thing that Allah brought in, subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He gave us knowledge. عَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. He taught us all the names. He taught Adam all the names. So knowledge is empowering. Knowledge is enabling. Education and spreading awareness is extremely important in bringing people outside of that incubator. I do think that youth do need to be incubated. I do think that we need to have that safe haven for the youth to come back, that solid foundation. But really, we need to equip ourselves and our youth and how to best use whatever is coming and new to them, using the fitna to be able to go out from the cave to the light, even if that means you're going to use the fire with your own hand. Just learn how to use it. So we need to shed the light on the fact that we are struggling like the global community, and being Muslims does not mean that we are immune. So at Noor Islamic Cultural Center, we decided that we are going to stand up for the stigma, thanks to everybody that participated in that line. We called it initially the NICC Mental Health Lab because we were experimenting on what is the best model on identifying the role of the masajid, but we were trying to cater for community needs. And again, remember that language matters a lot. So we renamed that to be the mental health line because we want to identify the roles of Muslim healthcare professionals. We wanted to tell the healthcare system that these are the roles that we need to see Muslims in. We want more representation. We want more relevance. We want to be catered for. We want to identify our needs, and we want you to attend to our needs as a Muslim community. So we have so many great community members and resources that can actually tell us how to pursue a community-based program. So we decided to talk about mental health, and we started doing that actively and engaged in the community in November of 2019, I believe, just a few months before the pandemic started. Thanks to Dr. Ayaz Haidar, Dr. Isma Mubinuddin, those who started like a suicide intervention program as soon as we have learned about suicide cases in our community here, near and dear to our hearts. And we've created our mission to raise awareness about the mental health continuum, who actually contributes to the mental health, who treats illness, who promotes wellness, and whom do we connect to across that continuum continuum, reduce stigma associated with mental illness, promote help-seeking behaviors and emotional well-being practices, and prevent suicide through individual education and outreach events in the Muslim community. So we work on 3 legs to achieve mental wellness, not just treat illness, through awareness, myth busting, like the panel today, education, education, and education. We continue to educate. This is a journey with no like final outcomes. We continue to learn who we are and why we are, especially with all of these changes environmentally. The historical image of Muslims have changed. We're mosaic, we're more contemporary. While the dish dash was at some point like the hallmark of Muslims, nowadays we see Muslims wearing suits and wearing hats. Still, all of these actually belong to our identity. All of these are great members of the community, and they carry the Islamic identity dear and genuine, right? And then we have the intervention through resources and policies. We want to contribute to policy change as Muslims. For instance, wellness and mental wellness can pretty much rely on having the Eid days being off for our students. I kind of engage and identify and announce, make us more visible, make our youth feel that they are part of the American community. Muslim community has to speak up and say, we want the Eid days to be off during school, during college. Why not? It's not really an impossible goal. We just need to speak up. Nobody heard us actually being concerned about that. Prevention, we want to continue to educate and empower and spread awareness and figure out a way that the masjid will have a definitive role in providing and promoting mental wellness through khutbahs, through mental health first aid training, Imam workshop training, community leaders training, youth-led activities, youth engaging activities, all of these things. I think that the masjid continues to struggle identifying its role in this continuum. How can the Imam provide health promotion through their role? I do think that the masajid need to continue to make sure that they at least do no harm by delaying care seeking from our youth and our community members, and then providing benefit and contributing to education and changing the narrative and using our Islamic knowledge and identity and giving back to the whole community, not just Muslim communities, through outreach events and activities as well. Our visionary action plan is to grow that resilience and identify and innovate new community-based programs to prevent, intervene, and educate our Muslim community on how to do this. And as you can see in this pyramid, it takes a lot. You need to invest into the education, in the education of individuals, in the youth, in the young, in the elderly, at the spectrum of all age, to reduce the generational gap, to bring in terminologies and concepts and use language that all Muslims can identify with. So when you talk about anxiety and depression, use words that all Muslims can relate to, like al-ham, al-gham, al-hazan. All of these words actually are a match for what Muslim mental health specialists use nowadays. I know a great person that actually does that in the art of life. His name is Abdurrahman Dhakir al-Hashimi. He's one of my mentors and scholars that has really contributed to the innovation and transformation of Islamically psychotherapy integrated Islamic integrated psychotherapy. There's also Dr. Rania Awad, Dr. Hamada Talib, Muslim Mental Health in Stanford, and Institute of Muslim Mental Health. And all of these resources will be available at the end of my presentation, inshallah. Really, we need to change our organizational practices. And I can tell you one thing that I've learned through my journey that was very humbling, working with all these wonderful people from all over the globe. We cannot go far, but together. You can go fast on your own, but without collaboration and working with multiple people and challenging your own biases, as Professor Sakina said, and overcoming roadblocks and barriers internalized by your past culture, you probably will not be able to go far. You really need to incorporate a lot of people from different backgrounds that you may have perceived at some point not on the same page. We have a lot in common as Muslims, and we have more in common as American Muslims as well. So I hope that we can appreciate and acknowledge these commonalities and embrace the differences. And I will talk more about that in the next slides, inshallah. We thought that our ideal team should include mental health professionals. As you have seen today, we had the psychologist, the social worker, the psychiatrist, our Imam, chaplains, which is something that I did not know existed until I started kind of recruiting for that team. We have wonderful chaplain, Chaplain Khurram Ahmed. He's an amazing person to work with. Our wonderful co-directors are actually from all backgrounds. Dr. Amir Shah, medical director at Cleveland Clinic, Sister Kinza Asif, our social worker. She's an amazing and heartwarming person to work with. Our co-director is actually a youth pre-med student, Suhaila Taha. She's very young, but she gives us the youth perspective. So always bring your youth to your table. Always bring, Ali bin Abi Talib, Karamallah Wajah, bring those young people on the table. They have a lot of wisdom. They may not be able to articulate big terms, but certainly they are great educators and mentors and advisors to what they feel and how they see the world. So their lens is very important in creating your visionary plan. Case managers, primary care providers, geriatricians like Dr. Fatma Chowdhury, she can bring in a lot about the elderly perspective, right? Something that we may not yet experience, but when we experience it, we want to learn more about how they see things and cater for their needs as well, connect them to the youth, reduce the generational gap. Educators, people in the education, like school counselors, teachers. We have a wonderful interventional specialist, Sister Mariama Diallo. She brings a great perspective into the mental health line. Community outreach people like Amina Barhoumi, Brother Woman, Iqbal, Usjud, all of these people kind of give a lot of components and content to that community mental health line. I think look always for team players who are capable of identifying their implicit bias, that are able to share their vulnerability, model the imperfection, understand that we are meant to be vulnerable, and the way that we can achieve peace is through submitting to that fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a sustainer, is the all perfect, and we get our energy and energize our batteries by connecting with him. So it's very important to find people who have that experience working with communities, what I like to call community experts. Those people who are willing to dedicate time, they're reliable, they have these, high work ethics that would want to serve the community. And from my experience, it makes a huge difference when people you work with, their biggest stake is to serve the community than their own selves. Self-servitude can come between us and reliably give back to the community. Think outside themselves and their own circles are very important. People who are invested in the Muslim healthcare, Muslim community promotion are gyms to such lines to form and such community intervention. And it's very important to understand that we need more Muslims on the table because we're talking to Muslim population. We are heterogeneous. We have immigrants and refugees. We are traumatized and bruised. Even American Muslims have been bruised a lot because of the narrative in the past few years. So people who are capable of delivering trauma-informed care, take into account that sometimes reactions and responses are not personal. People may snap at you, but not because they hate you personally, because they haven't learned how to regulate their emotions. And our youth have been through a roller coaster in the past few years. Those who have lived the past 18 years, they have seen tremendous amount of war zones, immigration, refugees, bans, borders, walls, and been called names all the time. So our youth have been raised in a time where challenges are nonstop. So trauma-informed care, compassion, accountability, authenticity, safe havens, masajid that are open for those that are spiritually wounded are very important. It's not just for a pious people who have figured everything out. So be careful that your masajid and your Islamic centers are well prepared to welcome everyone in. We have people with special needs. We have single women. We have limited English proficiency. So we really need a task force from within the Muslim community, not really to patronize non-Muslims or secular sect. There's a lot in those fields and arenas that can be offered to Muslim community, but we really need to start with that incubator, with that nuclear task force, and then expand afterwards, since after we have figured out like the logistics of how to best serve communities, and most importantly, created research and generated knowledge to bridge the gaps between the Muslim community needs and what the secular current mental health care provision has to offer for us. Our agenda included webinars like this, mental health literacy series, effective and active support groups for those with special needs. And we kind of created, multiple populations. So we had parent support group, hosted at the masjid. It was kind of hosted by the parent support group organized by Dr. Asma Dajani, by Ambreen Khan, really participated by multitude of respectful community mental health specialists. We created mentorship programs where youth teach us about their needs, and that continues to be a work in progress. Outreach programs for Muslim family and youth support. We utilize the current resources that are available, which are plenty. There was a community suicide intervention plan that created guidelines by Dr. Iyaz Haidar, by Dr. Ismail Binuddin. Around that table, we had My Project USA, Muslim Family Services, ICNA Sisters. So many people had input into that, and all of these people were hosted by Noor Islamic Cultural Center. So for me, Noor is the beacon of light. I cannot thank that center for their hospitability, for their welcoming nature, for innovation and transformation. May Allah reward them immensely. I think we used a lot of the youth to direct us to fill the gap in needed professions. We encourage the youth, and we continue to encourage all of the young professionals. Please consider mental health specialties, social work, psychotherapy, counseling, psychiatry, medical school, primary care, all of these at the continuum, school counseling, educators, be there in the community, in the Muslim community and in the global community. Please be there for your community. I know that it's very hard sometimes to deal with traumatized communities, but you can do it. We do believe in you. And I do thank the youth a lot for making me a better person, because they challenged every bit of learned habit. I had to unlearn a lot of my old habits and to be more aware of my implicit and explicit biases in order to grow and to give, because really the passion that we have towards our communities is genuine. And that could be the leading compass of letting go of all cultural packages and come closer, more authentic, and kind of hold ourselves accountable to give back to our communities, because our Islamic identity probably have been one of the most protective factors to improve our presence during this pandemic, mashallah. And then research. I can never overemphasize the importance of our participation in research as Muslims. Remember that as Muslims, we're not on the census, right? The census in the United States does not ask about deen, does not ask about religious affiliation. So the only proxy they have is race, ethnicity, and maybe the name. But beyond that, we have to really be more involved in community-based participatory research. I would like to re-emphasize the idea that illness cannot be transformed into wellness, and we cannot really walk that journey until we drop that exclusive individuality, allow ourselves to go out of our silos and echo chambers and think that, when I is replaced with we can cross the bridge from illness to wellness. Afia cannot be achieved without afu. Afu is pardoning yourself, forgiving your community, pardoning the differences between you and others, pardoning the environmental changes, overlooking the shill and look for the deep conversations, elevate people to your knowledge and allow them to also hold your hand up to their knowledge as well. We need the we to move farther. Our divisiveness and disunity has contributed tremendously to our invisible role as Muslims in the global community. So our model has relied mainly on community-based participatory research. So we started with a needs assessment survey, and we found that mental health at the top of the topics that Muslims want to talk about, and also the top of the topics that they would rather go to a Muslim healthcare provider to seek advice and help. We also found that there is a lot of data gathering institutions like the Family Youth and Institute, a great institution. I can't speak enough. Certainly, I am shamelessly biased toward the amazing and tremendous work they've done over the past decade. So I strongly encourage you guys support these data gathering institutions. There are the Family Youth and Institute. There is the Yaqeen Institute. There is the Initiative of Islam and Medicine. There's the Muslim Mental Health Stanford Lab by Dr. Rani Awad. Lots of these institutions, they're only studying Muslims. They do believe in us as unity. They do believe that we have much more in common than what is different. And they're bringing this up into the literature. So even non-Muslims will care to serve us and ally to our needs as well. Mentorship, I cannot overemphasize that. And I think I love what Sheikh Abdul Hussein said, that really mentoring youth to actualize themselves and equip them with the tools to face this community is much better than spoon-feeding content and theological ideas and tell them how to feel and how to do and how to think. Collaborations, I cannot also overemphasize that. In our model, we've collaborated with local, national, and international institutions. So locally, we collaborated with the Muslim Family Services for Grants and Support Group. We collaborated with My Project USA for youth outsourcing. We collaborated with ICNA Sisters for Halakha. We had like interdepartmental collaboration as well. We've collaborated with a lot of mental health professionals, with the Sunrise Academy, with the counselors, with interventional specialists, with the school outreach led by Sister Falak Basha and Sister Sumaya Hamatmat. So many people have really contributed to this. We also brought in civic engagement series where people can understand what policy looks like under Sister Nazik Habasha. So lots and lots of activities that are going on to bring in and build that community wellness rather than just speaking of illness, empowering, educating, enabling. Investments are very important as well. So we are actually proposing scholarships to support the youth who want to go into any of the jobs or professions that can serve mental health line, like social work, medical school, intending psychiatry or psychology, counseling, licensed therapists, all of these that are like more towards these mental health lines. So we are working on proposing scholarships for that reasons, and that's still work in progress. We're also investing in youth leadership. As I said, like in our directorship for mental health line, we have a lot of pre-med and college students taking leadership positions, and we're mentoring them through that. And they are stillers, very much excelling in their roles and engagement and involvement. Imam training workshops, we're trying to find and allocate the best opportunities for our busy Imam to be involved and engaged in mental health first aid training so they can actually recognize the red flags and signs and how to outsource patients as needed. And our Imam has been wonderful in making phone calls and say, hey, I think that we need you for this case. We really need you to help us. We have a case at the masjid. Can you please help us? And, you know, we have our chaplain, Brother Khuram, has been there consistently. Dr. Asma Mubin Ad-Din, Noor Clinic leadership of Dr. Malik Haq, all of these people. Everybody wants to serve in the community. So capitalize on the wonderful members of the community as well and bring those who are passionate. Try to refine your mission, vision, and objectives and goal statements. I love Kung Fu Panda. I feel like I can relate to that cartoon a lot. A lot of times as Muslims, we find ourselves living in our bubble because we want to be authentic. So we find ourselves kind of putting a lot of lines and boundaries around us. We don't want to deal with people. We are so worried about like going out to the secular world. We kind of have two softwares, one outside the masjid, one inside the masjid. However, we are really accountable to the whole globe in coming across comfortable in our own skin. So I like how the Kung Fu Panda figured out that the secret ingredient to his power was accepting who he is, accepting the fact that he's the chubby, black and white panda that loves to eat a lot, yet he loves Kung Fu and he's able to excel in both of them. He was able to kind of achieve the inner peace moving forward by accepting the fact that the past is not something that he has ownership of, but he certainly has all the power necessary to change his future and kind of get better control on his today, present, and tomorrow. And then once he figured out and accepted the fact that he's the dragon warrior and he can actually fight in any realm, whether it's the Twilight Zone or the current realm, he was able to pass this along to his whole nation, to all his team. He was able to empower. And that is something that you guys would notice, that if we reduce our ego and charge our spiritual power, especially during this holy month, we become empowered, and only empowered people can empower. Once you accept who you are, once you get to that inner peace, once you submit to the fact that we are imperfect, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our sustainer, our friend, our partner, as Sheikh Arif said, we're able to move on, to feel that power from within and empower those around us. Our tongues, our actions will become positive. We will bring people around. We will be able to be always authentic, always genuine, while practicing our accountability towards ourselves, our community, and the globe as a whole. Take-home messages from all of this wonderful collaborative effort that I'm so humbled to be the one presenting about, even though there are so many wonderful people that can talk about this probably better than myself. Our Muslim community isn't immune because we are humans. And I think the biggest problem is that we have been dehumanized, and our experiences has taken from a human realm to questionable, extremist, radicalized experiences. Our experiences are humane. That is why we're not really immune to any kind of illness, whether it's mental or physical or even spiritual. We are resourceful, we're wealthy. We have wonderful community members that can actually bring so much to the table, not only our table, but the global one as well. So embrace the differences and welcome the passionate people to do more and empower them and give them agency if you have any kind of leadership position. Collaboration is very essential for us to move farther at this point. And unlearning is harder than learning. So letting go of our cultural packages and use it only to improve the present and stopping the comparison between yesterday and today to prepare for tomorrow will help us a lot move lighter during the realm and the challenging and trying times that we live in. Change takes time. So while we are compassionate, we need to be patient as well. We really need to use the gratitude a lot. Be thankful for everyone who inspired you. Be thankful for those who gave you the idea, even if they don't know that they give you the idea. The more we practice hamd, the more we practice gratitude, the greater we feel, the wealthier we feel, the more our battery is charged. So make sure that you're grateful and patient at the same time. We live between shukr and sabr in our deen. So great gratitude and patience will take us so much farther as a community. Invest in your Muslim community. Don't ever be ashamed in any setting to say that you serve the Muslim community. You are part of the Muslim community. We don't have to be perfect. We cannot be perfect. We're not meant to be perfect. We are all work in progress. And then be a global citizen. Give to everyone. Don't look for conditions to give. Don't look for a shape, for a hijab, for a beard, for a thawb, for a language, for an ethnic background. Look out after the whole world because you can. The dragon warrior power is within you. And thanks again to our youth. I thank all my kids. I thank the gift of parenthood for making me a better person and challenging every myth that I've held before, busting it and allowing me to see that the truth is so big and the comfort zone is the universe for Muslims, and our faith is not really fragile. And even if our mental health is at a stake, we can certainly be well, even if we are overwhelmed. We can achieve wellness with a lot of pardon, patience, and partnership, inshallah. And these are references and resources that I have referred to in my talk. And then, as I said, research is very important. As part of the Initiative of Islam and Medicine, I strongly encourage all of you, brothers and sisters, to take part in this survey. It is meant for adults 18 years and older that have any interaction with healthcare system. And it does actually cater for denominations. So if whatever denomination you belong to under the wonderful large Islamic faith, it will cater for your needs. What you experience in the healthcare system is worth being catered for and listened to. So be part of the research now and today. Answer our survey and kind of point that you are from Columbus, Ohio in that survey. And if you have any questions or concerns in that regard for that research, feel free to email me at my work email. It's at the bottom of the flyer. And I thank you all for bearing with me for this few minutes and really lots of information. And I am welcoming any and every question. May Allah reward you immensely for doing this during the blessed month. And thank you, Huma, and the wonderful youth that have presented and prepared such a wonderful talk and panel. Thank you so much. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sandus. If anyone has any questions.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saad. This is a question for you. Noor is doing wonderful work as far as community involvement and community outreach is concerned. My question was that we have several Muslim community pediatricians, Dr. Wahida Abaza, Dr. Asma Mubinuddin, and Malika Haq. Have they had any involvement in the big nationwide children hospitals mental health pavilion as far as catering to Muslim youth?
So you asked me about two huge names in the community, mashallah. I don't think that I can quantify Dr. Wahida Abaza's and Dr. Ismail Binuddin's efforts because they have been here for decades, longer than I have been in Columbus. I know that Dr. Wahida Abaza did not only contribute to the national children's involvement, engagement, and exposure to the Muslim healthcare needs. I do believe that she did this at the Dublin City level. We continue to have a huge space to grow and to present and to expose the healthcare system to that. So I cannot speak on their behalf, but following what they do and learning from their steps, they have been heavily involved. And Dr. Abaza is also part of our outreach. So she invites a lot of healthcare teams into 101, Islam 101 talks, and she participates in a lot of outreach activities. So I invite you guys to also do this as well, especially if there are like specific and unique needs to Ahlul Bayt society, Muslim community. I do think that it's very fair for us to bring these needs to the healthcare team. And I know that Dr. Asma Mubinuddin, as for those who are following, she has publications for pediatric age group to kind of expose the communities to major holidays. This is really big value and manifestation of who we are and how our kids actually tend to interact with the school system. So she presented the concept of Eid and Ramadan, challenges of fasting during school system. I cannot speak to their tremendous efforts. I really cannot quantify them, but I do believe that they are heavily engaged. And I'm hoping that, at some point, Dr. Wahida Abaza will be part of our mental health child talk during the pandemic. And Dr. Ismail Mubinuddin has presented a couple of bioethics talks during the pandemic. So there are many community members that I would encourage you guys to reach out to, ask them for advice. And I told Huma this before, it's always important for the Muslim community to identify their boundaries, what things actually work for them, what things does not work for them. We are very heterogeneous and our needs may differ, whether slightly or vastly, and being able to deliver our boundaries is very important. So we continue to work in a collegial environment rather than kind of tipping on eggshells when we are serving our heterogeneous and diverse Muslim community. And I hope that I answered your question.
Do we have any more questions for Dr. Sandus? If we do not, we're going to move on. If anyone has any questions to any of our panelists, this is your time to ask, or you can privately message us. So I know I had a question before, and whoever would like to answer this can go ahead. So how do mental health providers cope with all the negativity they encounter?
That's a really great question. I'm sure that both Sana and Dr. Shandos have perspectives on this. It can be really challenging. And so it's really, really important that you have, like as Sana was talking today about, a really, really good self-care plan. And self-care happens in many domains. It's not just about, doing certain things for yourself. It could be in your environment, creating a room that feels really nice, that feels like a nice sanctuary, things that are soothing to you, finding ways to rejuvenate yourself. So what I'll do is I take kind of a stock over time, like, are all the things that I'm doing, are they depleting me emotionally over time and physically, or are they rejuvenating me? And making sure that you have a good balance of that. And if there's times when I feel like I'm starting to kind of dip, just check in again. What can I do that's rejuvenating for myself?
Does anyone have anything to add to that? Okay, we have one more question real quickly from the chat, and then I'll move on to the person in the Zoom that has a question. Actually,
Assalamu alaikum. Great session. To be very honest, I thought like I'm going to duck out after 30 minutes, but I've been hooked to this session all this time. Thank you very much for that. My question is very simple. What's the most basic flag, like a red flag, that we should watch for the kids?
I don't know that there is any specific red flag. I will say, specifically for depression, finding that your kids are isolating themselves, feeling like a burden on other people, and making any kind of statements about wanting to hurt themselves would be a red flag. But again, especially in Muslim communities, a lot of times mental health comes out in different ways. So it could be missing a lot of days of school because they have, a stomach ache. You take them to the doctor and the doctor says there's nothing wrong. It very well could be a mental health problem. So I don't know that there's any specific red flag, but there are some things that you can kind of look out for, both physical and mental, noticing any major changes. And also, if you notice that your child has been kind of down, and this goes for, for the youth on here too, if you feel like, you notice friends who have been down and then suddenly they're really happy that like everything, all of their worries are gone, that also can be a red flag. And just kind of checking in and making sure that, they know that you're there for them, and kind of making it a safe place for them to talk to you is really important.
okay, our next question is, this one's for Dr. Sakina. Can you elaborate a little farther about the difference between sympathy versus empathy?
I would say that empathy has the quality of understanding what it's like to be in someone's shoes. So you're actually kind of like taking yourself and understanding what would it be like if I was feeling this, or if what might it be like if someone was feeling all of these things or had certain experiences in their life. I see sympathy is kind of on the road to empathy, where it's like there's a caring and concern for someone who's going through something, but that piece of what is it like to be you, I think is a big part of empathy that is really important to connect to, that we often miss out on. So I would say that that would be the difference between the two.
Thank you. We have one last question. So, what happens if you don't have a family or your family is divorced? Who do you go to if you need help? Like, what are some other choices to go to?
I would say if you don't have a family, if you have any sort of guardian or someone who's caring for you, there's often resources at school that people maybe aren't taking advantage of as well, like whether it's a school psychologist or counselor that might be able to connect you to different resources. A great thing to connect to is doing some research online to find out resources. There's often youth-based mental health programs that run for free that people can have access to. I know that in Toronto here, we have programs like that that are available to youth that you can connect to. And maybe even, it's a bit different in terms of healthcare in Canada. So I'm not sure, because in Canada, we can just go to a walk-in clinic to any doctor and they can connect you to somebody. But I can't really speak to that part in the States. I don't know if Senna or Dr. Sondos has more information on that.
I know Senna's next, we have one more part for Senna's, which is community wellness. So Senna, you want to talk about that and answer this question?
Sure. Yeah. So it's really important to have a support group, whether that's your family, friends, people in the community. So I will be talking about some community resources. So let me pull up my slides. Right. So now we know a little bit about mental health problems and some solutions. So these are just some extra community resources for kids, teens, and adults. This is for everybody. So when, mental health problems can become overwhelming very, very quickly. And it's important to address your mental health before it becomes a crisis. It's, already been mentioned that the later that you address mental health, the more difficult it can be. I work in hospitals in crisis, and I see 10 to 15 people a week who are currently having a mental health crisis in the hospitals. And I guarantee that it's easier to go to a doctor or counselor before that happens than it is to end up in a hospital. That being said, if you need the hospital, that's why they're there. So make sure that you take advantage of the resources that are available to us. I'm going to go over some specific community resources. The first one is Southeast Healthcare. Of course, I have to plug my own agency. They offer outpatient counseling. That's both for adults and for youth. Their South 4th Street is the youth building. They also offer psychiatry in the same building and basic case management, which is kind of like linking to community resources. They are trauma informed, and they have a no cost or sliding fee scale, which is important. A lot of private agencies don't take like Medicaid, for example. So if you know somebody or if you are on Medicaid, sometimes these agencies can be a good resource. So I listed down their information at the bottom. Our next one is the directions for youth and families. So they offer outpatient counseling, and I listed some things that they specialize in, but they also specialize in kind of general mental health problems. They offer after school and summer programs. They can actually meet you where you are, so they can go to people's schools, they can go to people's homes, or that you can go to their office. Again, there's a no cost or sliding fee scale based on your income, and I've listed their information at the bottom. And then I have the third place I want to talk about is Sentaro. They have outpatient counseling. They really focus on counseling. I think they might have a psychiatrist in the event that you need one for meds. However, really it's kind of counseling is what they specialize in. They do family-centered care or college readiness, and they do also have basic case management. And then if you do have insurance, the easiest way to get in contact with an agency is to have your parents call their insurance for a list of covered counselors or psychiatrists. You can utilize your school resources. So all schools have a counselor or therapist. Sometimes you do need to make an appointment. For example, Columbus City schools, I think, share their counselors, whereas kind of more affluent schools, so schools with more money, tend to have their own, or sometimes more than one. And then talk to other people. So, tell your parents, your primary care doctor.
One of the parents on the session was like, I was going to hang out here for. Yeah, for.
Right. Oh. Anyway, tell your parents, a doctor, or a trusted adult if you are struggling. And that goes for if you have friends that are struggling, talk to those people. As for the parents on this call, remember that, sometimes it can be very easy to kind of brush off, not meaning to, brush off your children's feelings. It's also important to keep in mind that there could be a gender or a generation gap or a cultural gap, because a lot of times parents come from other countries that their kids didn't grow up in. But it can really damage the relationship between parents and their children if the child feels like, they've been brushed off. And sometimes that can also increase the risk for untreated or really severe mental health problems. So parents, please be careful, talk to your kids, and, helping support your child can also help, just listening can help, the youth feel, or help them kind of more than you might realize. So I want to talk a little bit about crisis. If you are in crisis, call 911, go to the nearest emergency room. I listed other crisis sources here. Net care is mostly for adults, children's hospital is for youth. And then there's a teen suicide prevention hotline. So it is for young adults and young people, so youth. It is teen to teen, which I like. So this is another resource. I know Professor Sakina had mentioned some of this a little bit earlier as well for other resources. And then these are some last resources outside of mental health specific. So Huckleberry House has shelter, domestic violence. Hands-On is a great resource if you just need any kind of community resources. And then the sexual assault hotline. And that's kind of all I have. To circle back around to that question about, what do you do if your family isn't able to be a support for you? I would say kind of building up any kind of community supports. And I can put in the Mental Health America has a lot of really great support groups. So I'll just copy and paste those into the chat here so that you can have that as well. So that is there. That's their the support groups. They have everything from depression to trauma to kind of they have a lot of resources, a lot of different types of support groups. So there's typically something that people find that are a good match for them. And that's all.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for joining and all the panelists for their preparation that took so much time and that they participated and for sharing their information with us.
If anyone wants to ask any more questions privately or they did not get their question answered, feel free to email any of their emails that they provided in their speech. And you can also email ASA, which is asacolumbus@gmail.com if you don't have their email still and you forgot it. We also want to thank all of ASA for working together for this event to happen. And we want to thank everyone who joined for staying till the end and listening.
We learned a lot and we hope you did too and find information and guidance that could come in handy. Thank you.
Thank you.